Hi, I'm Marty Agather, Embrace Prevention Care. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Preventive Care Now for older adults. In this series, we focus on what we call the geriatric determinants of health. These include chronic disease care, medication adherence, medically directed wellness, geriatric care principles, and patient psychology. All of these contribute to keeping older adults healthy, in their homes, and doing what matters most to them. I've said my piece, so let's get on with it.
I'd like to welcome everybody here for Preventive Care Now for older adults. I'm Debbie Howard, and I'm going to be leading the conversation today. And I'd like to thank Dave and Marty and Linda for inviting me to lead the discussion today. It is in honor of November, which is National Family Caregivers Month. So we thought that under the umbrella of Preventive Care Now for older adults, we would talk about preventive care from the caregiver's viewpoint. So may I ask you, Dave, first, and then Marty, and then Linda, just to quickly introduce yourselves?
Thanks, Debbie, and thanks for taking the leadership on our session today. I'm Dave Delesk. I'm CEO of Embrace Prevention Care. We're a company focusing on helping older adults with chronic conditions to take the right healthy actions that keep them healthy and out of the hospital. We are firm believers that caregivers need to be involved in the medical loop, so they know exactly what needs to be done for their loved one, and they can play a huge part in terms of making things better. And I think they're often underutilized and underappreciated, and we want to celebrate them here today, and appreciate Debbie taking the leadership on this session. So thanks a lot, Debbie. I'm Dave, and I'm done.
Howdy,
Marty?
everybody. Marty Agather here. I also am with Embrace. If you would imagine that as a sales and marketing guy, I've got a lot to say. Generally, I do. I'm not going to try to take up too much of Debbie's time here. I am Marty Agather. I've said my piece.
I am a Linda Sherman, and I am the managing editor of Boomer Tech Talk, and I have been putting articles about our recent Rethinking Aging Club sessions onto Boomer Tech Talk, and a recent one is Caregiver Resources, which was organized and led by Debbie, and there's great information there. That's boomertechtalk.com. And I am also the Chief Marketing Officer for MBET Health Miracle Dressing Wound Care System, which is used, one of the uses is the prevention of pressure injuries. So we are deep into prevention, and personally, caregiving has certainly been a part of my life. So I'm very sympathetic to everything everyone is going through in the world of caregiving, and delighted to be a part of this room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. So I am Debbie Howard. I'm a Japan expert and a market researcher. The Japan part is very important because it's the most aged society in the world. So there's much we can learn by watching age tech and caregiving there. I am also a former caregiver. I took care of my mom when she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and I was her 24/7 caregiver. And I'm also a caregiving advocate and author of a caregiving book called The Caregiving Journey, Information, Guidance, and Inspiration. And I work to raise awareness and contribute to initiatives that help individuals and companies manage caregiving so that the impacts are not so devastating. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and hopefully we will have a rousing discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to just mention a little bit more about National Family Caregivers Month. We're in our 22nd or 23rd year of celebrating the month of November as National Family Caregivers Month, and that was by presidential proclamation back in the Bill Clinton days. It's a month where we can all reflect and think about all that family caregivers do in our society. We know that, and I'm sorry, some of this information is not new to anyone in this audience, but I'm obligated to take my chance to raise awareness. We know that there are at least 53 million caregivers in the United States, and about 48 million of those are caregivers of aging loved ones. And that is a minimum number, by the way. The number of aging care receivers and their caregivers is only going to grow, with 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 or more every day. They've estimated that the value of the free work that family caregivers provide in our society is equal to the annual budget of Medicare. And that's an amazing statistic, because what that means is that our world cannot survive without family caregivers pitching in the way that we do. And we also have statistics that show the devastating impacts of caregiving. We have negative impacts in terms of emotional, physical, and even financial health. We have about 1/3 of our caregivers ultimately having to leave their jobs because they're so overwhelmed with their responsibilities. And the stress is so great that many caregivers actually die before their care receivers do. And if they manage to survive, another group passes away within 5 years following their care receiver's passing. And this is all again due to the strain and stress that they've endured while they were caregiving. So it's really important this month to think through your own family and friends, to consider who's caregiving right now, or who may soon be caregiving. And I can tell you that among everyone in this audience, I'm just looking at your pictures here, about half of you will be called into action to care for a family member within the next 5 years. That's a really sobering statistic. So that's why we're talking about this today. We're talking about preventative care from the caregiver's viewpoint. We had a wonderful discussion this morning in the Rethinking Aging room called products for 50 plus, and that was with Dr. Hon Pak, Chief Medical Officer of Samsung Electronics America, and we talked about knowing your numbers and creating a baseline, so health monitoring for you and your loved ones. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more now and talk about prevention. And we're going to talk about preventative care for yourself, knowing that there's a high probability you'll probably end up being a caregiver. We're going to talk about preventive care for your care receiver. Sooner's better than later. And we'll talk a little bit about planning for caregiving at the end if we have time. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about taking care of yourself. And we've talked a lot about this in this group before. We've talked about the importance of being proactive about your own health. And I would hope that we're all on top of this, whether we're thinking about caregiving or not. But it's especially important when we think about the fact that half of you, again, in this room will be actively called into service to care for a loved one. And you actually want to go into caregiving in a really strong state, if there were no other good reason. And there are a lot of good reasons, obviously, to stay in good health. So I'd like to start with Andrea Trank, who is here in the audience. Andrea and I have worked on a number of projects together, and she is an integrative health expert. Andrea, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself briefly and then talk a little bit about the importance of preventative health care as
Got it.
individuals.
Thank you.
Good, good, sure.
Hi everyone. I'm Andrea Trank, and I'm a caregiver for my mom who went through a 10-year journey of Alzheimer's. And the stress of caregiving for her was what triggered my autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease has a couple of legs, but it's usually a trigger that finally brings it out. And it was the 10-year journey of taking care of her. But in the meantime, I started this health journey and I became a full-time yoga teacher, health coach, and now heart math practitioner. And all three of those tools are ways that caregivers can maintain their health during the caregiving journey. The biggest issue I think most caregivers have, and I think any of you who are caregivers would admit, is time, right? You don't have a lot of time because your first priority is taking care of your loved one who is facing challenges. But yet, if you don't take the time, you end up serving with basically a half full and eventually an empty cup. And I think Debbie's the one that, we have two Debbies here that I've worked with, and I remember that analogy of you have to take care of yourself first. If you do not have a cup full, you are not going to be able to handle the stress physically, emotionally, and mentally of taking care of somebody who needs you to be in tip-top shape. And in light of this, I've gotten very involved in a group called Yoga for Caregivers, and it is we do dozens of free yoga classes and other sessions all week long. And all you have to do if you're a caregiver is search for Yoga for Caregivers on Facebook if you're on Facebook, and you sign up for free, and people like me that really care about caregivers just donate yoga classes and whatever other services we can do. So I teach a live class there every Tuesday morning, and again, anybody who's a caregiver can join. I also teach a tape class the opposite week on Thursday afternoons, and we have all length classes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour long. And really, if you just take a couple of minutes a day and stop and ground yourself and listen to your heart and slow your breathing down and become present with what's going on inside of you, you will be able to get yourself in a more resilient state. And it is all about resiliency when you're doing this kind of work. So I am Andrea, and I am done, and I'm open to answering any questions.
Thank you, Andrea. And we're talking today for those of you who just joined us about the importance of being proactive about your own health, knowing that sooner or later you will probably be in a caregiving role. And I'd like to break the rule, Marty, about pulling the screen to refresh and just ask Zalan to say a few words from the medical perspective about how important it is for us all as individuals, even before we become caregivers, to be monitoring and understanding our numbers and that sort of thing. Zalan, could you give us a few comments?
Thank you for the invite, Debbie. Good to see everybody here. In terms of monitoring numbers, I think I balance it out with two things. One is you and ourselves as a human being whose sort of preferences are there as well, and also the importance of health literacy in looking after yourself. So with the first one, I would say is that our personal wishes are important to be incorporated in any decision that we make, because ultimately everything we talk about has to be tailored according to what your needs are. Now, to give you an example of that, if you were to say that for me, if somebody's cholesterol was slightly up, and for the person though, in terms of their type of work they do and the quality of life, that wasn't a priority. It's a question of what we could agree on as some sort of arrangement to address some parts of that, and help as a clinician to understand that person's point of view as a human being who has all the challenges of the social and the psychological stressors that are around them as well. The second one, in terms of your own numbers, I think the importance of that can't be underestimated, because for example, interventions in just simply to do with blood pressure, for example, is the single biggest intervention that you can do to reduce your likelihood of getting a stroke. And if you're not aware of that need of how to address it and the importance of that, you can't make any changes to that. And some of those interventions, once you understand that, they're very basic things that will help you address those issues. So, sometimes a blood pressure tablet might reduce your blood pressure by 10 millimeters, for example, on the scale. But an intervention of reducing your weight by about 10 kilograms, for example, might do the same, or probably more. Actually, it might be 10% of your blood pressure drop. And it's understanding it in context. So I think as healthcare professionals and as a society, our role is to achieve a certain higher level of health literacy when you want to address anything. And if you can't do anything else except to understand what we're talking about, then if we haven't managed to convey that to our patients, I think we've ultimately let them down. So I'm Zalan, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you so much, Zalan. And I know that's really important for us all to look at our family histories and understand things that are going on. I know that I personally watch my blood pressure and I know my numbers, and I also monitor for macular degeneration and glaucoma because I know those run in our family. And so it's really important to be proactive about that. And I know, Andrea, thank you for your comments earlier. I know that with your mom and her Alzheimer's, that you are super proactive about your own watching yourself and your diet. Can you just say a few words about some of the things that you do as a preventative to getting Alzheimer's?
Well, what was really interesting was I got very concerned about the possibility of having Alzheimer's when she was diagnosed. And I did do a lot of tests beyond traditional blood tests. I went and got advanced tests done on my hormones and saliva tests, and went crazy on getting tests. And the one thing I just want to caution is don't go crazy about getting tests, because then you'll scare yourself to death. And really, stress is the biggest factor in every one of these things, and that's what we're learning. What was interesting is after doing all those tests, I realized I had more risk of heart issues than I did of having memory issues. So the direction I started to take based on my fear of getting Alzheimer's was a certain diet for brain health, and I even became a memory maintenance yoga teacher because I thought I would learn and teach other people how to do yoga to prevent declining brain health. And then more and more I realized my issues were autoimmune disease, which was thyroid disease, and things related to my heart. So I expanded, and really, when you're looking to get healthy, there are the basics that you do, right? You eat whole food. Now, whether or not you eat clean sources of meat is up to you. I am a person who still likes to have protein. I don't do well on a completely vegan diet, but a lot of people who have heart issues go on a vegan diet because there's a lot of research in it. But I think back to what Zalan was saying, it's all about literacy. And what I did is I empowered myself by becoming an expert literally in everything, so that when I went in to see a medical practitioner, I could say to them, I'm concerned about this. Can you test this? And I would like some advanced testing on my hormones. And my thyroid, like they wanted to put me right on thyroid medicine, but I have Hashimoto's. And Hashimoto's is not the same thing as having hypothyroidism. So the medicine, since it was an autoimmune disease, might have prevented me from accomplishing what I did with diet to actually calm my autoimmune disease, which is my body attacking itself. So let's say I solved my thyroid issue, the autoimmune disease could have attacked another organ. So I became so educated about this, and I found medical professionals who would work with me. But the more educated you are, the better off a chance that you have to actually, and I think this is what Zalam was saying, that you have to advocate for yourself and work with your medical team. And it's best to do that before you become a caregiver, because you're not going to have a lot of time when you're a caregiver. So being proactive is very, very important. I'm Andrea, and I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And that's a really natural lead into this whole topic of self-care and having a good self-care routine. Again, as you said, before you become a caregiver, because if you think you don't have time right now for self-care, you really, really are going to be challenged once you become a caregiver. And I'd like to invite Deborah Harlow next to speak. Deborah and I do an annual self-care challenge. We'll be doing our fifth one this coming January. We do it every January. It's called the 31-Day Easy Self-Care Challenge, and it's designed with caregivers in mind because we both work with caregivers. But that is the kernel of the idea, is that we know about self-care from the caregiving viewpoint because it's the toughest when you're a caregiver. But anyone can join our self-care challenge, and it's designed to raise awareness of the elements of self-care and to allow the participants to experiment and to find your own best self-care prescription, is what we like to say. So, Deborah, could I ask you to just say a few words about self-care, because you are my guru on that.
Mm, So I am the Deborah that Andrea was mentioning earlier about filling up your cup. It's a principle in my life and has helped me throughout my entire life. I started as a caregiver when I was age 12, becoming the primary caregiver to my dad when he had a major stroke. And what I have learned at every development throughout my life, from being a youth into a young adult and on, is that the journey of self care is absolutely critical. And the most important piece is it has to be self selected. When we are in that state of overwhelm or caregiving or about to go into crisis, it is actually kind of annoying when people say you can just go do yoga or meditate or breathe or do whatever the thing is because you're in the midst of a crisis. So the self-selection is a critical piece to what Debbie and I do with the 31-day easy self-care challenge, is because the individual has to be excited about the activity. They have to be able to self-select. They need to choose from the list and then give it a try. And that's a big piece that I have really noticed throughout the years in working with caregivers and families, is that having compassion for each person's journey being their own, and that sharing information is just that. It's the person has to be able to want integrated into their life, and they need that loving compassion and support to be able to do so. And Debbie, you worded it well in saying that they can just dabble in the ones that are there, and most of them can take no more than 5 minutes. That's the other piece about self-care, is that it needs to be easily accessible and integrated into their life.
Thank you, Deborah. And that leads perfectly to Gary Barg of caregiver.com. Gary, I know you have the Fearless Caregiver Conferences, and you must be no stranger to this topic of self-care. So I'm thinking that this is a great segue into talking about self-care once we do become a caregiver. Would you like to say a few words, please?
I thank you so much. This topic is amazing. All the things I was thinking I might want to say have pretty much been said by all the speakers in front of me. So I'm confirming in everything that everybody's been saying. We always say that caring for yourself is job one. You may be the CEO for Caring for Your Loved One, Inc., but if you don't care for yourself, who's going to step in and care for you and them? So it's not selfish. It's not something that you don't have time to do. It's the primary thing you have to do. You are actually the most important aspect to your loved one getting the best possible care, because if you're not healthy, the game's over. Um, 26 years ago, I founded today's Caregiver magazine, Caregiver.com, and then we started hosting the Fearless Caregiver conferences around the country. And I've written a handful of books on family caregiving, mostly with the information and lessons and tips that I've learned from being in the rooms with the family caregivers at the conferences around the country. Because, you know, not only caring for yourself is job one, but isolation is a killer. That we have, so many ways for us. We've got Clubhouse and we have Zoom, and, we have complimentary newsletter at caregiver.com every week. We put out two, where again, we're sharing the wisdom from family caregivers, because that will kill you. That the isolation and the stress and the challenges we face as caregivers, if we're not able to share them with our fellow caregivers, it's not going to go well. The upside, in a sense, of caregiving right now is that when we started, nobody was really talking about it. I mean, it was, people say, "Oh, you have a magazine for caregivers. Is that CNAs and AIDS?" Yeah, but mostly our role is to support the mission of the family caregivers. And that what has happened is there have been so many studies, so many real statistics come out that, the world has really come to understand the value proposition of caring for caregivers, because that's where, the all the pressure of the healthcare system really is on the family caregivers. Everything would fall apart if we stepped away. But the first statistic that I saw, which actually was replicated a few years later, was Stanford University. Some doctors produced a study that said that if you're a caregiver of a loved one dealing with cognitive issues, you are 40% more likely to die before they die. And that's a horrible statistic. And in fact, it hadn't changed is terrible. But the good part of that is that it's only for one reason and one reason only, and that's due to the effects of stress. So if we as caregivers can mitigate our stress, and as Zolan was talking about, um, check when we check our loved ones' blood pressure every day. When do we check ours? We make sure our loved ones get to all their doctor's appointments, and we don't end up going to our doctor's appointments. They get therapy, all the physical therapy possible. And I don't know the last time any caregiver I've spoken to has actually had an exercise program of their own. And we always we always like to say they get all the nutrition that they need, and we're having our meals at midnight, ordering through clowns' mouths into drive-throughs. So that has to stop. Caring for ourselves has to be the primary role of a family caregiver, because it all falls apart when we don't. So the one other quick thing is, it's funny, Debbie was talking about National Family Caregivers Month, which obviously it is now, Challenge Summer's months, a few other months, and it has been that long, because I remember, I think 25 years ago, sitting in a restaurant on Los Olas Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale with Suzanne Mintz, who started National Family Caregivers Association, which actually founded National Family Caregivers Month, and it was week at that point. It was a National Family Caregivers Week, and we were talking her into changing it to month. But I always say that every single day of every single year is National Family Caregivers Day. So every day it's all about the caregivers and what they do, and the role they play. And our job is to make sure that every caregiver gets cared for too. So thank you for letting me ramble on. I appreciate it. Our next Fearless Caregiver Conference, virtual, of course, is on December 1st. And you can find that information on caregiver.com or reach out to me. It's complimentary. And we have elder care attorneys and ombudsmen And basically, it's all about getting the caregivers' questions answered, because that's the other part. Caregivers need to know that their questions are vital and they need to get them answered and not be pushed aside, and need to make sure that they're respected as equal members of their loved one's care team. So thank you very much for doing this. This is a great subject.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thank you for saying that it's not selfish for caregivers to take care of themselves. I know that when I was caregiving, I actually took better care of myself than I do now because I was scared. I was afraid. And as you said, you're the last line of defense there for your care receivers. So if you don't take care of yourself as a caregiver, the whole show breaks down. But it's a pretty tall order to fill. And I think it was Deb who said we don't want to hear, why don't you go to a yoga class while you're caregiving, because it's kind of I know when I first started working in this area, I would say, oh, you need to take care of yourself. But um, you start seeing the anger in the eyes coming back at you because it's really hard when you're caregiving. And I love what you said about it not being selfish, and it is your primary job. To put I think I've heard it put another way is to put your oxygen mask on first, uh, before you start trying to help someone else. So all of that's very important. Please be sure to save the date for December 1st for the Fearless Caregiver Conference. And let's see, Cindy,
Debbie, can I
yes, go
interject
ahead.
something if I may? Um,
Sure.
I was talking about caregiving for my friend who had Parkinson's, and her husband is also a very close friend of mine. It's kind of an amazing story. He's also my ex-husband, but we've stayed. Both he and my husband are still friends with him, and I struggled so much to ask him to get more help because he felt that he needed to do it himself, and that showed his love for her, and he
Mhm.
was crushing himself to a crumb, and it didn't make any sense. It was like very towards the end we finally got him to get some help, and it's just so important, and it's something that is important for all of us to keep reminding caregivers that they have to take care of themselves. And I just sent the quote that Gary just gave. I was back channeling with Marty that I wish we had clips turned on, because that's an amazing quote that he gave, that some doctors produced a study that said if you're a caregiver of loved one dealing with cognitive issues, you are 40% more likely to die before they die. And that's a horrible statistic.
It
That
is.
is, and I just sent that to somebody who's a caregiver, that I'm
Mm.
going to use that as ammunition from now on. Thank you, Gary. So ammunition is helpful, and a statistic like that is actually very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, for sharing that. And that is a very scary statistic. And I was also shocked with that. I heard that a little while ago, but I'm really shocked with that statistic. And I do think we need to use it as ammunition to get people to pay attention to how devastating caregiving can be. I know that in my own situation, I feel I had everything about as good as it could be. In other words, optimal situation. My mom had long-term health care. We had some help. I had my own bedroom and space to be in as a caregiver, and still, it really nearly killed me. And it only lasted for a year and a half. And if you've got a care receiver with cognitive issues, obviously that can be an 8 to 10 or more year proposition. So this is a very real problem in our society. I'm going to move to Marty for popcorn news, Marty. So get ready. I'm going to let you do your popcorn news, but I saw a piece of news just just today that I was really happy with, and that was a webinar called "The Caregiving Crisis in America." So I was really happy with that. Marty, I'm going to move to you and let you run popcorn news. Would that be okay?
Fine. So popcorn news, the way it works, if you've got a news item, this is sort of crowdsourcing preventive care news. Doreen, go ahead.
Hi, I think it was the New York Times or something. But in Japan, they have found a solution for the increased use of manpad, not diapers for adults, aging adults, because the diapers are for adults are exceeding babies, and they're using them to burn and make for energy, for recycled energy. So that was my popcorn news. I can't remember where
Excellent.
I saw
Thanks,
that
Doreen.
article.
Appreciate that.
Zalan also was flashing his mic. Zalan, you were next in line. Would you like to go next?
Sure, yes. I had something to share for popcorn news. Um, I listened to a really interesting podcast and sort of journal piece with the British Medical Journal podcast. It's called Doctor Informed: The Patterns Which Emerge, and it talks about patient safety and what are the drivers for sort of mistakes happening, and what are the reasons that we can get sort of major sort of clinical incidents happening in hospitals. And it talks a lot about how cultures of impunity and cultures of slow sort of acceptance of fault can accumulate and gradually create this sort of attitude of allowing fault to happen. It's a really interesting listen. It taps into a lot of other resources ranging from black box thinking type of things about everything from the Challenger shuttle explosion to other incidents which show something about human nature and how easy it is to fall into those traps. So I just wanted to share that very quickly, and I'm done speaking.
And
Thank you, Zalan. Okay. Well, I didn't expect it was going to be so exciting. There's lots of messaging happening behind the scenes. So it's great that everybody's excited about this topic. And I'd like to ask you, Doreen, next to talk a little bit about this movement element and perhaps even working out together, because I know you have a lot to say on this area.
Have you finished the popcorn news?
Oh, Susie? Okay. Doreen, let's let Susie do popcorn news first, and then we'll go to you. Susie?
Thank you so much. Well, actually, it happens to be that I just today come back from a 3-day conference in Copenhagen, Denmark, with the title of Health and Rehab Scandinavia. 5,000 visitors, 200 companies in the fair on exhibition space, and they voted the best new product of the year, and it's actually on my bio picture.
Oh, wow.
And Margie, in the link in my bio, I put the link to the company who is making the product, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. I'll send you the link afterwards directly. So you have to enlarge the picture, and what it is, it's a wheelchair, but what's the price goes to is the motor in front of the wheelchair, because that is the new innovative device. It is made in a way so you can fit it onto every wheelchair. So it fits all wheelchairs, not just one specific kind. And the reason for giving it out was that it gives independent speed and joy to people who are normally very reliant on other people, and also the muscular movements in their arms. It's also reasonably priced. So it's an assistive engine to the wheelchair. And everybody was well chuffed about it. I looked at a lot of other products there. The news article is in Danish, so I found the homepage for the company making the device itself. If it comes in English, I will send that to you, Marty, as well.
And Cindy, did I see you flashing your mic for popcorn news?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what constitutes popcorn news, but I've got a story. Debbie started to call on me before the popcorn news, and I wasn't sure if it fits under popcorn news or not.
Please
It's
go ahead, Cindy. I was concerned that we didn't get back to you, so
oh, you're very
it
kind,
doesn't.
Linda.
Don't worry about it being popcorn news. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I just wanted to share because I happened upon this just fantastic um, incident in my family that I just want to scream from the mountaintop. So when COVID hit, I signed up for personal training with a personal trainer who worked with me 3 times a week at the beginning, just because I was so scared of becoming, 350 pounds sedentary. It's so easy for me to do that if I don't have structure. And my mother came to visit for Thanksgiving, and so she was there. And so when she was in the background, I said to my trainer, "Hey, can you give my mom something to do? She's 84. I don't care for her, but I anticipate that someday I will, probably. If we're lucky, it won't be. Uh, yeah, it's always hard to know, right? But fortunately, she's in good health, and so he just gave her some flexibility things to do, and it was really nice because he would tell her to do something and I would do my training, right? And then at Christmas, I wanted to give her a package of 10 sessions with him. I don't know what else to give my mom, right? And she said, "No, I want to keep working out with you." And so ever since, so the trainer was willing to investigate training with geriatric clients, and he was willing to do the research that he needed. And ever since then, we have been training. It's been over a year. We've been training together twice a week. And it is so motivating for her to have her daughter in a training session, and it's not too hard for the trainer to give her something that's very different from what she gives me. I've just really been delighted with the outcome of that, and it just seemed to fit perfectly in the topic of this room, preventative care for older adults, because it's self-care for me. I need that exercise for my mental health, and it's self-care for her, and we get to do it together. And I just wanted to let everyone know about it because it's just been such an addition to our lives. And with that, I'm complete. Thanks so much for letting me share.
I love that story, Cindy, and it's a wonderful segue into thinking about how can we help our care receivers be more preventive with their health care, and working out together is just a wonderful. It's a social activity as well for you, I'm sure. And I'd like to ask now, Marty. I just want to make sure because I see your mic flashing. Did you have something to say?
Just in admiration of the story. It was perfect popcorn news. Made my day.
Did anyone else
Thanks.
have popcorn news before we move forward?
Could I just comment on what she said too? The interesting thing about having her and her mother do this together is you are contributing to both of your health through the nervous system co-regulation too. And the fact is, you're keeping your mother and yourself in this social engagement, safe and social part of your nervous system, your ventral vagus nerve, which is so important for your health. So it's just an amazing story in so many ways and should be duplicated over and over again. So I applaud you also, and really I'm glad you shared that story.
I am looking, oh,
Andrea, and
thank
I'm
you so
done.
much, Andrea. I'm looking for other trainers, right? Because there's only so much time this particular trainer has, and he's been just amazing. But I'm looking for other trainers that I can trust to actually refer people to, because I tell this story to my friends who have parents that may not be motivated to work out, but it's just a together time that's just really special. So it serves two purposes. So thank you for having this room and allowing me to share that, because I do want to replicate it so much.
Absolutely. I love that story. I think, Deborah, did you unmic yourself there?
I did. I just wanted to share one standpoint of what that is. For me as a sandwich caregiver, having everybody on the same page for all activities is really helpful. And with me being right now currently long distance caregiving, we're doing them over either Duo or Zoom. And my daughter, who's 10, and my mom, who's her grandmother, they will do like little stretches together, or they'll have a dance break. And so it adds to their relationship as well as including physical movement. And then
Mm.
they'll end up having some time to read a book together or talk about their day. And I just wanted to echo what Cindy was sharing, is that anytime we can create continuity in the relationship, it doesn't seem like a chore to exercise or a chore to have a phone call. And being long distance hasn't put a damper on that. We've just utilized the technology to continue doing that. Wednesdays at 4:00 is their time every week.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Preventive Care Now for older adults. Browse show notes to find other episodes, check our calendar to see upcoming dates and times, and join us on Clubhouse if you can. We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Peace.